Hello there, my fellow Warhammer fans and book aficionados, and welcome back to another review and discussion video for old Warhammer books. Today we're gonna go over the second volume of the much beloved and acclaimed Gotrek and Felix series. I've already reviewed the first book, Trollslayer, a number of weeks ago, also as the very first video of this series, and since that got the most attention and views so far, I figured why not try continuing this series. I mean, everyone loves Gotrek and Felix, right? I will also be trying a slightly different approach with this one, as for the first part of the video, I'm gonna go over my general thoughts regarding the book, including some extra bits of lore, if and when I think they're necessary. And for the second part of the video, we're gonna do a synopsis of the volume itself. Obviously there will be some spoilers, but I'm gonna let you know beforehand. And that way, maybe these videos can be useful to people who don't have the time to read or listen the entire thing, in addition to people who already know the story. I would also like to ask you, which would you prefer for future videos? The discussion first and the synopsis second, or the other way around? Do let me know in the comments. I'm only asking because, as most of you probably know, not everyone watches whole videos on YouTube. Some just watch like a few minutes and then move on. And speaking of reading and listening, before we get started, I would also like to humbly request that if you enjoy these discussions and would like to see and hear much more in the same vein, including stuff on the very stories that we are discussing today and here, consider checking out my Patreon page. The link for that and everything else important is in the description. There you can find my old content, my old library of content from the disabled channel, as well as some upcoming new stuff. So do join as a free member if you want to check it out, and decide for yourself if you want to support my continued existence and work. All that said, back to Skavenslayer. Skavenslayer is, as I mentioned earlier, the second book in the lengthy and epic Gotrek and Felix saga. It is written by William King again, as are all GNF books, up to and including Giantslayer. It is also one of the most memorable to me personally, because, believe it or not, it was my very first introduction to the Skaven race in Warhammer. Beforehand I did know some vague stuff about, rat people, but I knew next to nothing about these particular rat people. And oh boy was I in for a treat. Yes. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Skaven, you can think of them as the most devious, greedy, backstabbing, cowardly, malevolent, but at the same time hilariously incompetent rendition of a fantasy race. Now, there are Radman-esque races in other fantasy settings without a doubt, but I don't think there's any that are as over-the-top and funny and ridiculous depictions as the Skaven in Warhammer. Of course, while they are often used as comical relief, looking at them from a serious standpoint, they can also be incredibly cruel, selfish, ingenious, and downright sinister and scary. And as somebody who got introduced to them in this book, I think if this is gonna be your first meeting with them as well, it is definitely one that you're gonna remember. I do remember back at the time I was reading this first time, and for many years afterwards, that it was the funniest Warhammer novel I've ever read. And while that funniness diminished a little bit when I actually narrated this thing many years after, it is still something. And that is saying something, because in those days I read dozens of Warhammer novels. Anyway, back to Gotrek and Felix. Another thing worth mentioning here, in my opinion, is that this book, just like Trollslayer, is structured in a way that is a bit more unique. It is also the last of the Gotrek and Felix books sectioned in this way. Namely, there are no conventional chapters, but some longer stories instead. 6 of them to be precise. And each of these does succeed the other, so they do form a narrative whole, even though they each have a certain theme to them. It is certainly more cohesive than Trollslayer, I'll give you that. I can't confirm this officially, but I'm of the opinion that the author dedicated most of the stories to individual Skaven clans. Since Skaven clans are all very unique from one another and each has a special gimmick, for lack of a better term, I think that the author wanted Gotrek and Felix to face each of the major clans in some somewhat separate stories. At least that's my take. Skavenslayer is also a very memorable book because it introduces one of the best and funniest villains, not just from the Gotrek and Felix saga, but maybe even from Warhammer Fantasy as a whole. And that character is, some of you probably guessed it already, none other than Greyseer Thanquol, and his famous Rat Ogre bodyguard Bone Ripper. Now, regarding Bone Ripper, there's an interesting aspect of his that's unique to the series, but I'm not gonna spoil it here. In fact, those of you familiar with the series know that Thanquol was in fact such a popular character that he even got his own spin-off trilogy of books, which you can actually check on my Patreon. Thanquol, for those unaware, is a Greyseer, which is kind of a high-ranking priest/sorcerer of the Skaven, and he is pretty much everything that is wrong with the Skaven race. But portrayed in this book, it's a bit more comically than some other Skaven stories. And just to make this clear, while Skaven are portrayed often for laughs, in-universe they are also quite horrifying. I mean, human-sized rats that walk and talk, and are as filthy and disease-ridden as one can imagine, and that's the least of the dangers they pose. This book does see the epic duo in the city of Nuln, where they have to work some odd jobs, including the sewer watch at the very beginning. And while they do this, they get drawn into a conspiracy involving, the Skaven, and the plotting and scheming of Greyseer Thanquol, who wants nothing less than to destroy the entire city. As I said earlier, the book is split into 6 stories, and in each of these we're gonna see Gotrek and Felix fight another faction of Skaven, and unravel another of the plans of Thanquol. And it is in these confrontations that a lot of the humor lies, because the protagonists don't really take the Skaven that seriously until well into the second half of the book. And the plots that they foil and the enemies that they fight, they're almost shown as cartoonish. Or at least cartoonishly incompetent on the part of Thanquol, who, by the way, is portrayed as one of the best and brightest of Skavendom. If nothing else, if you want to read an adventure Warhammer book that is predominantly written as a comedy, you're definitely not gonna regret checking out Skavenslayer. In fact, I would even go as far as saying that I do recommend this book even more so than Trollslayer. Although if you're interested in this, you probably read or listened to Trollslayer already. Yes, it is entirely set in the city of Nuln, but that doesn't mean that there's no diversity in the locations and the story. In fact, it's a great example of how great the world building is in Warhammer overall. Even if you know nothing of the old world or any other aspect of the setting, Nuln is still a place that feels alive and is very detailed in all its locations, districts, events, and other characters and whatnot. Now, for the second part of the video, I did say we're gonna do a synopsis of sorts of the stories in the volume. Now, these stories are in order: Skaven's Claw, Gutter Runners, Night Raid, Plague Monks of Pestilence, Beasts of Moulder, and the Battle of Nuln. Big warning from this point on, as there will be spoilers. Warning, spoilers ahead. The first story is obviously Skaven's Claw. And in this we find Gotrek and Felix down on their luck in the city of Nuln, and taking up the lowest of low-paying work as sewer jacks. Sewer jacks are kind of like sewer guards. And while patrolling the depths of the sewers, their squad stumbles upon one Fritz von Hallstatt, the corrupt chief of Countess Emmanuel's secret police, and this guy was clandestinely meeting a Skaven. The corrupt official does run away, but the Ratman assassinates the sergeant of the squad of which Gotrek and Felix are part of, before Gotrek kills it. You see, Van Hallstatt had been secretly using the Skaven to eliminate political rivals under the guise of, quote-unquote, rooting out the mutants. Completely unaware that the Skaven, in turn, were playing him to weaken the city defenses. And to protect the secret, Van Hallstatt coordinates with the newly arrived Greyseer Thanquol to liquidate the remaining sewer jacks. After their fellow watchmen are murdered by Thanquol's massive rat ogre bodyguard, Bone Ripper, Gotrek and Felix end up storming von Hallstatt's mansion. Also worth mentioning here, I think, is the gimmick of Bone Ripper that I mentioned earlier. You see, throughout all the Gotrek and Felix story, and Thanquol's own trilogy, there are a lot of Bone Rippers. Because basically, when one of them dies, Thanquol just gets a newer and quote-unquote better one. And he calls all of them Bone Ripper. He gets at some point he even gets like a half-mechanical one that's like a robo-rat ogre. Anyway, Thanquol is forced to flee from Gotrek and Felix, the first Bone Ripper dies, and the mansion burns down. The second story is Gutter Runners. Now, after they were fired from the sewer watch because of all this nonsense that happened, Gotrek and Felix end up as bouncers in a tavern called the Blind Pig. Now, I don't remember this exactly, but I think the owner, his name was Otto, and he was an old acquaintance of Gotrek, and that's why they get hired. It is also here that Felix strikes up a small romance with a girl called Elissa, or Eliza. I'm mentioning this because Felix's romances usually involve mentioning a girl just once in this book or that, outside of a couple of major ones. But in this, he actually has at least an attempt at a relationship with this girl, as she does make multiple appearances in the book. Angry from his previous defeat, Thanquol sends in a specialist detachment of assassins from Clan Eshin, and these are called Gutter Runners, hence the title of the story. These are led by another character from this book that is gonna be recurrent called Chang Squeak. The assassins do split into several groups. One tries to ambush Gotrek in an alley, only for the Slayer to effortlessly kill them all and sound the alarm. Then they try to assassinate Felix while he's sleeping with his girlfriend, and again they fail. Eventually, the Skaven trigger all the people in the tavern to rouse and kill them all. The third story is Night Raid, and this one introduces us to another Skaven clan, Clan Scryer, who are basically engineers and technomancers, as the leader of these fellows plans a midnight raid in the engineering school of Nuln to steal some plans for a steam tank, I believe. Thanquol, jealous of Clan Scryer's leader, one Hesketh One-Eye, decides to sabotage his rival. But he does this in the most hilarious fashion possible, as he tries to get Gotrek and Felix to kill his enemy instead. He sends another recurring character that is gonna pop up in a few other books, Lurk Snitchtongue, and he uses him to send messages to Gotrek and Felix. And I do remember this little Skaven actually hurling bricks with weirdly written notes to Gotrek and Felix, and it's actually quite hilarious. The trap does work, and Gotrek and Felix do go to the college and end up spoiling the plans of Clan Scryer, and actually giving Thanquol kind of a victory. All in all, it involves a prototype steam tank going amok and the College of Engineering suffering some serious damage. The fourth story is Plague Monks of Pestilence, and you might see a pattern emerging here, because this one deals with another Skaven clan, namely Clan Pestilence. You see, after all his failures, Thanquol quote-unquote employs this clan to create a disease and start crippling Nuln from within. He commissions the Plague Priests to brew a deadly brew of the Yellow Plague and releases that into the city water supply, or at least tries to. But of course, Skaven incompetence strikes again. The plague actually mutates and begins killing a lot of the Skaven instead. Of course, people above do get affected, so it's pretty grim over there as well. The city descends into panic as bodies begin to pile up. Gotrek and Felix do trace the source of the rot down to the crypts beneath Nuln, and in another brutal, grotesque battle, Gotrek hacks through infinite waves of fanatical plague monks, ultimately killing their leader and destroying the plague-brewing cauldrons. The fifth story is Beasts of Moulder, and, you guessed it, this deals with another Skaven clan and their gimmick. This time, of course, Clan Moulder. Desperate for an actual victory, Thanquol enlists the terrifying bioengineers of Moulder with this one. His plan now is to unleash a stampede of ravenous, giant and mutated super rats to destroy the granaries of Nuln, effectively starving the population, and after which he would have invaded with a proper army. And along with the rats, Clan Moulder also provides armored mutated monsters, and a newly stitched together Bone Ripper Mark II to crush the Slayer. This time, Felix and Gotrek team up with local watchmen and they defend the food stores. Gotrek engages again with Bone Ripper 2.0, and who'd have guessed it, he kills him again. The Molder beasts are destroyed, the rat swarms are scattered, and Fankol's new plan lies in ruin. Now the sixth and final part of the book is the battle for Nuln, and in this one they battle for Nuln. With all his subtle plots thwarted by his own squabbling sub-commanders and his own incompetence, Fankol is left with no choice but to launch a frantic all-out assault on Nuln from the sewers. His thousands of Skaven troops pour into the streets, and the human defenders are pushed to the brink. It is in this part of the story that Fankol actually infiltrates a grand ball for the elite of the city of Nuln, all the aristocrats and whatnot, and he takes the leader of the city, Countess Emmanuel, and some other nobles, hostage. Also, Fankol tries to attempt a strategic fallback after failing in that by detonating a massive stockpile of black powder. Of course, as usual, and as is gonna become quite common in future books, Gotrek will corner Fankol and defeat him, even if not kill him. The Skaven army eventually retreats, and the Under-Empire of the Skaven is defeated, for now. Now, after all this nonsense is done, like all reluctant heroes, Gotrek and Felix receive no recognition or payment whatsoever. The ruling nobility covers up all that happened and blames, quote-unquote, mutants and rioters. And I think it's worth mentioning here, and this goes for pretty much all stories set in the Empire in Warhammer Fantasy, or most of them anyway, and that is the fact that the Empire and the average person refuses to acknowledge that the Skaven are a thing. It is a bit of a meme that the Skaven do not actually exist. And in universe, people believe that they don't exist because, the Skaven are very secretive. Of course, the dwarves know that they exist because they've been fighting them for centuries. But the humans, the government, so to speak, of the Empire refuses to acknowledge that the Skaven exist. And it is a bit of a theme that repeats over and over. Not just in Gotrek and Felix, but in other Warhammer stories as well. Gotrek and Felix also receive no public credit whatsoever, and, disillusioned and a bit disappointed, but having survived the Subterranean War, the Slayer and his Rememberer pick up their meager belongings and quietly walk out of the gates of Nuln, hitting the road in search of Gotrek's glorious doom. And that, my friends, is the story of Skavenslayer, the second volume of Gotrek and Felix. I hope you folks enjoyed this, or at least found it useful. If you'd like to see more discussions and synopses like this, do feel free to like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you think of Skavenslayer. Is it among your favorite Gotrek and Felix books? Among your favorite Warhammer books? And if you'd like to see any particular Warhammer book covered in the future, do let me know that as well in the comments. While I don't remember all of them in detail, I have read a great number of Warhammer novels back in the day. Thanks a lot for watching, and I wish you all a healthy, safe, and awesome day. Sigmar's blessings be upon you.